Trump just gave the world an ultimatum: buy American chips or get cut off. At the same time, Saudi Arabia was just asked to write a $1 trillion check to America. Not for oil, not for defense, but to save the US from a semiconductor collapse. At the same time, Washington just declared that using a Chinese-made chip anywhere in the world could violate US law. And now, Trump's sending letters to over 150 countries, dictating tariffs like a global toll booth operator. The world didn't vote on this, but they're about to pay for it. What happens when China fights back and US allies stop playing along? In a single press conference in Riyadh, President Trump asked Saudi Arabia to round up a $600 billion investment commitment to a full $1 trillion, just days after the U.S. 10-year Treasury yield spiked back to 4.48%, triggering fears of a second inflation wave. According to Bloomberg, the U.S. now faces a debt servicing bill of over $1 trillion annually, making foreign capital essential for maintaining domestic stimulus and subsidizing semiconductor reshoring. Trump's request wasn't tied to mutual projects. It was framed as a direct injection into U.S. growth, justified by what we've done for them. But Riyadh's own first quarter 2025 deficit hit $15.7 billion, with NEOM alone projected to consume $1.5 trillion by 2030 per Saudi state data. Trump's demand wasn't just bold, it collided directly with the kingdom's own survival math. And yet, that didn't stop the pitch. Because what came next was a trade not of goods, but of allegiance. While Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang confirmed the sale of 18,000 Blackwell AI chips to Saudi AI startup Huawei, the Commerce Department simultaneously declared that using Huawei's Ascent chips anywhere in the world may now violate U.S. export law, even if made in China, citing probable U.S. technology origin. Reuters reported this doctrine shift as part of a broader secondary control policy, extending U.S. enforcement globally, including against third-party buyers. Trump's Middle East pitch centered on chips as leverage: buy our tech, get our backing. But buried under the glowing deals is an ultimatum: accept U.S. AI hardware or face retaliatory trade restrictions. The pitch isn't subtle, it's geopolitical extortion through silicon. And while Nvidia expands into Saudi data centers, the White House threatens to penalize any country touching Huawei. So the question isn't who wants chips, it's who's willing to play by rules they didn't write. Saudi Arabia's ability to deliver even $600 billion, let alone $1 trillion, faces sharp constraints. According to IMF estimates, the kingdom needs oil at $96 per barrel to balance its budget, yet Brent crude dropped to $79 in April 2025, hammering revenue. Riyadh's public investment fund already committed $2 trillion to Vision 2030 mega projects, including the NEOM Smart City and Qiddiya Tourism Complex. Fitch warns the kingdom may issue up to $120 billion in new bonds by 2026 just to stay solvent. Yet Trump's pitch depends on funneling PIF capital into American firms, while Riyadh builds its own semiconductor infrastructure at home. Bloomberg notes that Saudi Arabia committed $10 billion to AI hardware through Huawei, but no evidence suggests the remaining $590 billion exist as deployable capital. The real ask? Divert funds from domestic nation building to foreign GDP rescue. But MBS isn't just a donor, he's a rival developer, and every dollar sent to America weakens his own empire in progress. Trump's February executive order to create an American sovereign wealth fund raised eyebrows among economists, not because of ambition, but because of structure. Unlike Norway or Singapore, the United States runs a twin deficit, a $1.7 trillion federal shortfall, according to the CBO in 2025, and an $842 billion trade gap, as reported by the USTR. Sovereign funds rely on surpluses. The proposed U.S. fund would instead be debt-fueled, increasing Treasury issuance in a market already bloated by over $34 trillion in federal debt. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's suggestion that the fund could compete globally assumes U.S. bureaucrats can beat private equity returns, despite a lack of precedent and the risk of politically motivated investments. Critics from Brookings warn of sectoral favoritism, asset bubbles, and distorted capital markets if public investment replaces private capital allocation. The fund's real purpose may be diplomatic, used to lure allies or subsidize reshoring, but the price is clear. America's fiscal credibility is now a bargaining chip. Let's freeze this moment. Because what started as a $1 trillion pitch is about to turn into a global ultimatum. Trump's administration is abandoning traditional trade diplomacy in favor of tariff enforcement letters, with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick confirming that nations will soon receive their rate, bypassing formal negotiations. The move follows failed attempts to secure 90 trade deals in 90 days, which collapsed under logistical pressure. Instead, the United States now threatens secondary sanctions on countries using Chinese chips, even if the chips don't transit through the U.S. According to the Semiconductor Industry Association, American chip makers lost $23 billion in revenue due to restrictions in 2024. Now, the White House's strategy is to force global buyers into the U.S. tech stack by weaponizing market access. Trump's final offer isn't an offer, it's a price tag. And countries from Vietnam to Switzerland face tariffs equal to or greater than China's reduced 30% rate, despite being allies. If Washington's goal was tech loyalty, the message got muddled. Because this isn't how you win friends. It's how you dare rivals to build alternatives. In May 2025, the U.S. extended its export control reach beyond borders, declaring that Huawei's China-fabricated Ascent chips are now under American jurisdiction, on the grounds they likely incorporate U.S. origin technologies. This doctrine shift, reported by Reuters, marks a legal escalation that effectively criminalizes the use of Huawei AI chips globally, even if they're built entirely on Chinese soil. But the logic hinges on probabilities, not proof. The Semiconductor Industry Association warned this move may provoke a regulatory arms race, undermining confidence in multilateral supply chains. Meanwhile, U.S. companies like Nvidia, who just secured a $10 billion Middle East chip deal, remain quietly exposed, with CEO Jensen Huang stating in a CNBC interview, China is still a $50 billion market. It would be a tremendous loss to exit. So while Washington tries to paralyze Huawei, its own tech giants are bracing for friendly fire. And the bigger question? Whether this gambit actually slows China or accelerates its independence. China is leaning on one principle the U.S. perfected: let demand fund development. In 2024 alone, Beijing imported over $475 billion in semiconductors, according to customs data, creating a domestic incentive powerful enough to justify massive state investment. The Ministry of Industry and Information Technology confirmed an additional $30 billion in funding for Huawei's chip ecosystem in Q2 2025. Bringing the national total to over $145 billion. That dwarfs America's CHIPS Act allocation, now stalled below $35 billion. China's borrowing costs, meanwhile, remain 2.5 percentage points below U.S. Treasuries, allowing it to subsidize R&D without triggering inflationary panic. As Bloomberg reported, Nvidia is now building an R&D center in Shanghai tailored specifically to the Chinese market, evidence that U.S. tech firms are hedging, not retreating. If the goal was to isolate China, the result may be a fortified parallel ecosystem. And it's not a secret, it's economics. U.S. enforcement isn't stopping at China, it's turning global. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick now warns that any country using Huawei chips may face secondary sanctions or be pushed to the lowest tier of the U.S. tech trade list, according to internal memos leaked to the Wall Street Journal. Yet this hardline stance is triggering resistance. India, still under a 26% U.S. tariff, is reportedly delaying iPhone production expansion while exploring Huawei integration for domestic infrastructure projects. The European Union, meanwhile, has requested formal WTO arbitration to assess the legality of the extraterritorial restrictions, citing violation of sovereign procurement rights. Even Saudi Arabia, fresh off its AI partnership with Nvidia, has refused to cancel legacy contracts involving Huawei-based networks, Bloomberg reports. The dilemma is clear. Either accept higher US chip costs and political strings, or invest in non-Western alternatives and risk market retaliation. What remains unclear is whether US pressure will fracture alliances faster than it can consolidate them. In an abrupt reversal, President Trump scrapped his 90-nation negotiation roadmap and authorized direct tariff orders to be delivered via diplomatic letters, bypassing trade talks entirely. According to Financial Times sources, over 150 countries are expected to receive rate cards setting mandatory tariffs for access to the U.S. market. The justification: administrative capacity. But critics say it's economic coercion repackaged as efficiency. Trump slashed China's tariff to 30%, yet raised rates on U.S. allies, including Japan, 32%, Switzerland, 35%, and South Korea, 29%, despite no comparable deficits. The inconsistency is driving speculation that tariffs are being used not as a trade balancing tool, but as leverage to secure chip compliance. Goldman Sachs warned in a May 2025 note that the abrupt shift risks undermining global supply trust, especially as companies accelerate diversification out of the US. Trump calls it reshoring. But with Apple withholding India investment and Taiwan signaling legal challenge, the risk is that America's final offer sounds less like a deal and more like a demand letter. So now the mask is off. It's no longer just about chips. It's about control. A $1 trillion ask from Saudi Arabia. Legal claims over Chinese-made semiconductors. Tariffs handed down like verdicts. The US wants to lead the AI race, but it's doing it with debt-funded diplomacy, untested legal doctrines, and ultimatums to allies who aren't sure they still want in. Meanwhile, China is quietly stacking capital, cutting deals, and building a mirror supply chain with American DNA embedded in every step. So let me ask you this: if America's allies start resisting and China stops waiting, who really wins this war? Drop your take in the comments. We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out another video that is now on your screen.